Sometimes I just have to respond to something I see in the mainstream media, and this is one of those articles. It's also a very good example of how these journalists really do believe the official line of everything. It just shows that a thinking journalist is a very rare thing indeed. I was embarrassed reading this article because frankly, it's embarrassing that a mainstream journalist knows so little about a subject. It's as if little Peter from the local primary school wrote it in his lunch break. Let's have a look at it. It's an article from Dan Hodges of the Telegraph, who's apparently a respected journalist by his peers. He shouldn't be. He should be laughed at. But sadly, his peers are all of the same cloth. So what do you expect? The article is this one. Let's dive in. Syria has now become a greater foreign policy catastrophe than Iraq. Straight from the off, the title. Just how many British servicemen and women died in Iraq? 179. How many have died in Syria? None. But according to Dan Hodges, no servicemen and women dying in Syria is a greater catastrophe than 179 servicemen and women dying in Iraq. And also, how many Iraqis died in the Iraq War? Really strange title, especially when you add into the fact that Tony Blair's been living with a possible war crimes trial over his head because of Iraq. And we're still awaiting the Chilcot inquiry 6 years after it was supposed to be published. I suppose Cameron did kill 2 British citizens with an illegal drone strike in Syria. Does that make Syria more of a catastrophe than Iraq? Anyway, let's move on. I have in my hand a piece of paper. Actually, I have on my screen a document produced by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which says, "We believe that there should be no extension of British military action into Syria unless there is a coherent international strategy that has a realistic chance of defeating ISIL and of ending the civil war in Syria. In the absence of such a strategy, taking action to meet the desire to do something is still incoherent." The quote from the document he had in his hand, that was in fact a digital document on his computer, seems quite sensible to me. We didn't have any plan going into Afghanistan, we didn't have any plan going into Iraq, and more recently, we didn't have any plan going into Libya. And look at those places now. The report, by what is traditionally regarded as one of the House's most influential committees, is already having its desired effect. The Prime Minister is reportedly shelving plans to bring a vote on British military action to the Commons. Downing Street denies there has been any U-turn, pointing out the government's strategy hasn't changed, but was always predicted on there being a clear parliamentary majority in support of intervention. But, however, it's dressed up. The committee seems to have got its way. David Cameron cannot promise to single-handedly snuff out the ISIL threat or end the Syrian civil war. So we have peace in our time, which means never-ending death, destruction and carnage, if your watch is set to Syrian time. Death and destruction because you have America backing rebels who are Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're being funded by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, NATO and America, and they're all attacking Assad, who has the audacity to fight back. If you want to destroy ISIL, ISIS, IS, whatever they call themselves, if you want to stop them, the best way to do it is to get those countries I mentioned earlier to stop funding them. Write a bloody article about that, Hodges. And by the way, did you have anything to say about Libya's no-fly zone that killed, some reports say, up to 60,000 innocent people? Or is that your idea of peace in our time? Have you ever heard of General Michael Flynn, Hodges? Have a listen to what he said a few months ago.
In 2012, your agency was saying, quote, "The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria." Mm-hmm. In 2012, the US was helping coordinate arms transfers to those same groups. Why did you not stop that if you're worried about the rise of quote-unquote Islamic extremism?
I mean, I hate to say it's not my job, but that my job was to ensure that the accuracy of our intelligence that was being presented was as good as it could be. And I will tell you, it goes before 2012. I mean, when we were in Iraq, and we still had decisions to be made before there was a decision to pull out of Iraq in 2011. I mean, it was very clear what we were going to face.
Well, I admire your frankness on this subject.
Very clear what we were going to face.
Let me just before we move on, just to clarify once more. You are basically saying that even in government at the time, you knew those groups were around, you saw this analysis,
Sure.
and you were arguing against it. But who wasn't listening?
I think the administration.
The administration turned a blind eye to your analysis.
I don't know if they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision.
A willful decision to go support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda,
Well,
and the
a
Muslim
willful
Brotherhood.
decision to do what they're doing, which you'd have to really ask the president, what is it that he actually is doing with the policy that is in place, because it is very, very confusing. I'm sitting here today, Mehdi, and I can't tell you exactly what that is, and I've been at this for a long time.
What he is saying here is that the Obama administration knew something like ISIS would grow from their support of Islamists in Syria. What grew out of those Islamists is ISIS. So the people fighting Assad from the get-go were not pro-democracy demonstrators that you people in the lamestream media would have us believe. The people fighting Assad from the get-go were hardened, armed to the teeth, American-backed terrorists. Syria has now become a greater foreign policy catastrophe than Iraq. Up until today, we stood guilty of acquiescing to the slaughter. Now we have added appeasement to our moral charge sheet. By saying that we've added appeasement to our moral charge sheet, that's just ridiculous. And it shows me in that one statement that you simply do not have a clue about what is actually going on in Syria. It's not black and white in Syria, Hodges. There are a lot of grey areas. You're treating your readership with complete contempt by just saying, Assad, bad man, must kill. The most significant passage in the report relates to what the committee calls the political and diplomatic risks. It should really have headlined the section, The Risks of Upsetting Vladimir Putin. The language is coded, but the meaning is clear, especially to the Kremlin. What you have written there is complete nonsense. What do you want, Hodges? World War III? I bet you would be the first post-acne sufferer to join up and fight, wouldn't you? Or would you actually be tucked away somewhere with your laptop, writing dribble like this? What's the alternative to the way Syria has panned out? Do we go it alone and risk a confrontation with Russia? Hell, maybe we should just go ahead and bomb Moscow and ignore Syria. What do you reckon, Hodges? Is that what you want? Quoting from the report, much more substantial Russian intervention on the side of the Assad regime that started at the end of September 2015 has complicated even further any proposed action in Syria by the UK. On September 30th, Russia began to conduct airstrikes in Syria in support of the Assad regime. It has also begun to provide more substantial military support on the ground, as has Iran. The Russian government states that its efforts are aimed at fighting terrorist groups in Syria, including, and not limited to, ISIL. But the US has claimed that airstrikes have been largely aimed at groups fighting Assad, including groups affiliated with the Free Syrian Army that have received support from the US. Although international opinion is mixed about the long-term implications of the intervention by Russia, in the short term it has appeared to limit the options available to others. There are no moderate rebels in Syria. The Free Syrian Army are made up of al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and ISIS. The terrorists America support are terrorists. Let's decode the conclusion that Russian intervention has appeared to limit the options available to others. Russia has unilaterally intervened in the region. Russia was invited by Assad to help protect him from bad men, or good men in your eyes, who are attacking him. Obama and Cameron have said that they want regime change in Syria, which, I don't know if you know, is illegal under international law. To get round this, they've been funding terrorists such as the Free Syrian Army, who are in fact Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They've been funding them to attack Assad on their behalf. Russia have come in and pissed the UK and especially America off, because they are bombing the terrorists that they've spent billions equipping, training and funding to fight their proxy war for them against Assad. Surely, Hodges, not even you could honestly believe that America can lose billions of dollars of weapons for them just to happen to land in ISIS's lap. Do you honestly believe that? Even you, Dan Hodges, might see this as stretching reality a little too far, or maybe not. Maybe you really are that dumb. It has intervened to prop up its local puppet, the butcher, Assad. Russia is targeting those groups opposed to Assad, groups we support, we armed, and formally identified as the legitimate representatives of the Syrian people. Wow, you got some of that right. But really, who formally identified Al-Qaeda and ISIS as the legitimate representatives of the Syrian people? Because I'm certain that it wasn't the Syrian people. I bet it was some Whitehall hack that made the call to get around laws that we have in this country about arming terrorists. Wake up, Dan. This is becoming embarrassing. So now we are told we cannot intervene ourselves for fear of upsetting Russia and provoking a regional conflict. Or, to use the language of the committee, our options have been limited. That is textbook definition of appeasement. It is also a textbook definition of international impotence. So, just what do you want, Hodges? Do you truly want a regional war with Russia, who are doing nothing other than protecting Assad from terrorists, be it ISIL, IS, the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, terrorists that we support? They are all terrorists. It sounds like you want us to just wade in without an exit plan, without any plan at all, and kill as many people as possible. You need to spend less time on your Xbox, Dan. What you should be asking is, why are we, an apparent, moral, upstanding country, despite being led by a man who has a liking for pigs, why are we, the UK, backing terrorists in other countries? A country, by the way, that has done absolutely nothing to us and is, let's be honest, very unlikely to do anything to us. There is a heck of a lot more of a chance that ISIS, which were created by America, funded by Saudi Arabia, both apparently our friends, there's a heck of a lot more of a chance that ISIS attack us here in the UK than Assad. You don't need to be a student of international history, or even a student of modern international diplomacy, to realise what deadly seeds we are sowing through our post-Iraq embrace of isolationism. We said if Assad, indeed if any state, used chemical weapons, that would represent a red line. Chemical weapons were used, and we did nothing. Apparently chemical weapons were used, but not by Assad. Who on earth would use chemical weapons on the very day and near the very place that the UN chemical weapons inspectors were going to inspect for chemical weapons? Not even Dick Dastardly would be that stupid. The rebels, the people you would have us believe are pro-democracy demonstrators, the terrorists our government and the West are backing, those are the people who fired the chemical weapons, Hodges. A professor at MIT even agreed with that synopsis. Why do you think Obama did nothing when his apparent red line was crossed? Because he knew Assad didn't fire those chemical weapons. You had the rebels on YouTube bragging about the fact that they fired the chemical weapons. It's not a case of we did nothing, as you suggest. It was a case of bugger. We lied about who fired the chemical weapons, and now we've been rumbled. That means we can't do anything. Bollocks! We said we would not sit back and watch a sovereign state fall victim to the aggression of another sovereign state. Russia invaded Ukraine, and we sat back and did nothing. So now you want a lesson on Ukraine, do you? It would appear you do if you believe what you've just written. But let's stick with Syria for now. Maybe I'll give you a lesson on Ukraine in the future. We said the case for intervention in Syria was now overwhelming. When did we say that? Was that when Cameron was trying to make the case for bombing Assad in Syria? Or more recently, when he was trying to make the case for bombing ISIS in Syria? Which one was overwhelming? I'm a bit confused by that statement. Indeed, we said it was vital to protect our national interests. Who is we that you speak of, Hodges? Who is that? Who is that we? And why is bombing Syria in our national interests? Remember, America created ISIS. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and America are funding and supporting ISIS. So why is bombing Assad in our national interests? Like I've said before, you want to stop ISIS? Defund them. Take their money, their weapons away from them. And to prevent acts of terror occurring on the streets of Britain. The old protect us on our streets. So you want to bomb Assad, who's done nothing to us, to protect us from Western-funded and trained terrorists who might bomb the streets of Britain. But you want to bomb Assad. But yet we need to be protected from ISIS on our streets. And then Russia intervened, and now we are preparing to sit back and do nothing once again. Is it only me, or does anybody else think that Russia are doing quite a good job at destroying ISIS? They've done over 1,400 sorties, hit over 1,700 targets, they've destroyed 250 ISIS command posts, they've destroyed 51 training camps and 131 depots that were probably filled with American weapons. We do not need to bomb Syria, Hodges. The Russians are doing a bloody good job, a hell of a lot better than America were. Remember, apparently America have been bombing Syria for a year, but in reality they've been bombing an odd building here and a lone American Humvee there. So yes, we need to sit back and do nothing and allow the Russians to do the job for us. What lesson is Putin learning from our repeated demonstrations of our capacity to talk loudly and carry a pitifully small stick? What lesson is Assad learning, or ISIL? Putin and Assad have probably learned not to trust the West because all they do is sponsor, support and fund terrorists. What lesson is any despot anywhere on the globe learning? If bombing Syria was all about saving lives and human rights, then why aren't you advocating to bomb North Korea or China? This lesson: if you stay in power, pick up the phone to Moscow and pick it up quick. Moscow will back its commitments to you, and Moscow will back them up with cold hard steel. The West, well, there's a legacy of Iraq and public opinion and concerns about human rights to factor in. With the West, it all gets a bit complicated. In the case of Syria, it is complicated for the West because they are funding and arming the very terrorists our own government say want to get us. They can't bomb these terrorists because the West are paying for them. America had its chance to destroy ISIS, but it decided not to, instead opting for a policy of supporting the terrorists rather than destroying them. So it is complicated for the West. It shouldn't be. We're told we're a moral, upstanding, stiff upper lip nation. Our government isn't. The death toll in Syria is reaching that of Iraq and will soon surpass it. Bloody hell, I thought the death toll in Syria was about 250,000, not 6 to 8 million. The humanitarian catastrophe the civil war has unleashed is destabilizing the entire region, and that instability is now spreading to the European mainland. I agree with that, it has. So do something about it, Hodges. Campaign for America and the human rights loving Saudi Arabia to stop funding ISIS then. Defunding them would stop them dead in their tracks. Syria is now a de facto safe haven for ISIL. Well, so is Libya, thanks to our government's murder spree there. In fact, only today, the President of Egypt has called on David Cameron to complete his mission in Libya to stop it falling into the hands of Islamists. I think you'll find it's already too late. The Telegraph journalist didn't write too much about Libya, but Richard Spencer did write this article. Moderate opposition groups, the government estimates their strength totals around 80,000, almost the same size as the British Army, are effectively being abandoned to their fate. Assad is still in power. By moderate, do you mean the guys that John McCain met with? The ones that eat raw human hearts? There are no moderate Syrian rebels, Hodges. Wake up, boy! The use of chemical weapons, their actual use, not mere production and storage, has been effectively sanctioned by the US, the UK, and the rest of the global community. Of course it has, because it was used by the very guys the US and the UK have created, armed and funded and trained. And now in the face of Putin's latest aggression, we do not recognise the Assad regime, so we cannot recognise the request for assistance Assad has proffered to Putin's forces. We are again sending out the message, Russian might is right. We have done the unthinkable. We have actually managed to surpass the horror of Iraq. On this occasion, we have done through via crimes of omission, rather than commission, but crimes they are. And we will pay an even bigger price for this, because we know how this ends. We know where appeasement leads, and we know what happens to the reputations of men, honourable men, who produce pieces of paper and tell us they are a substitute for confronting force with force. The members of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee have produced a weighty report. It will hang around their necks for a long time. Stop being so sanctimonious, Hodges, and grow up. If you want World War III, then keep writing tosh like this and sign up to the army yourself. Put your money where your gobshite mouth is. But you won't do that, will you? If World War III started, I'm sure you'll be tucked away under the stairs in some semi-detached somewhere, shitting yourself. So let me sum up this article. You want us to attack Syria because the rebels that the West funded, armed and trained into existence set off chemical weapons, and the West did nothing because people found out that it was the rebels that fired the chemical weapons and not Assad that done it in it. But still you say we should have gone to war over this. You also say that despite Russia being in Syria, doing a bloody good job of killing terrorists, we should still go in there, and if it means a confrontation with Russia, well, so be it. That's just life. And all this while you're hiding in your coal shed, eh? This is the most ridiculous, pro-death, pro-killing, pro-murder, pro-war, pro-insanity piece I have ever read in the Tory graph. Dan Hodges, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is an awful, awful attitude to take. You need to open your eyes. People like you, with the platform you've got, can be very dangerous. And that's why I had to highlight this article.